Hey everyone, Rho here. Well, the votes are in and the people have spoken. You have voted the Imperium Secundus as the right move by Roboute Guilliman. And well, today we discuss why it's not viewed this way within the lore and address the reasons for and against it. General spoiler warning to begin, as we will be referencing events from across the Warhammer 40k universe, so you have been warned. But with that said, let's just jump straight in. So the popular vote lands in favour of Imperium Secundus. What a bunch of heretics you are. The reach of the ruinous powers obviously running deep. Honestly, it wasn't even close. You voted in an absolute landslide. When I combined the results, it was over 80% of people voting in favour of Guilliman's move. That he made the right move in founding Imperium Secundus. To me, that is really interesting, because as I said back at the start of the week, the first time I read The Unremembered Empire, I was in complete agreement. I didn't quite understand what the big deal was. To me, Guilliman was making absolutely the right move. However, as the years have continued and we've been able to take in other points of view, I have learnt to appreciate why it isn't, and most particularly why it isn't viewed that way within the lore. So let's begin by looking at why it was the right move for Guilliman to make. Now obviously, in going with the results, this is the common view amongst the fanbase, and absolutely drop your reasoning down below in the comments, why you voted the way you did, and that's for both sides of the argument, of course. Now I think the absolute first point that has to be addressed is that Guilliman's heart was in the right place. And I can only speak for myself here, but if I was to guess, I think this would definitely be a factor in how people feel about it. As the reader, we have the luxury of being able to see and feel the character's innermost thoughts. We have the benefit of being able to feel their emotions in these most pivotal moments, the factors that play into them making the actions and decisions that they do. And this can't help but endear us to them. When they suffer through pain, we don't just witness it, we get to see how they're feeling it. It draws us into them in a far greater emotional depth. When they feel happiness, we get to share it, and when they feel betrayed, we get to feel the impact of their world crumbling, how the confusion and rage tears at them, far more than any physical wound would. And this is exactly the same principle in Guilliman's founding of the Imperium Secundus. As we discussed on Monday, as the reader, we got to see just how emotional Guilliman was, how he genuinely felt that the throne world may already have fallen, how his brothers had been lost. There was no malice in that emotion, there was no politics. It was a man watching his life and dream crumble around him. The very reason for his creation burned to ash before his eyes. In that moment, Guilliman really had only one choice to make. He could despair and give up, or he could fight to save the dream. Fight to save what was left. And so he decided to fight. I think that would strike an emotional chord in all of us. No, maybe Guilliman's emotions don't play to the practicality of the matter, but I think they are extremely relevant to how we feel about the decision he made. In him we saw the simple, honest fight for survival. Betraying his father wasn't even a factor. He was simply fighting to save what they had built. Now, another factor I feel that plays into backing Guilliman's decision, again not one that necessarily hits the core of the question, but one I feel definitely leans you to feel a sympathy with him, is that Guilliman was built to think and act this way. The very nature of the Primarch the Emperor created was to build and run empires. That is Guilliman's forte, the essence of who he is. How can you say he's doing the wrong thing when you created him to do exactly that? We've got the conversation between the Emperor and Malcador within the Vengeful Spirit, where they don't exactly act surprised to find out what Guilliman may be doing. When the Emperor asks Malcador what he thinks Guilliman is doing, Malcador quite simply replies, "It's Guilliman. He's building an empire." There's no surprise there. In a sense, if you're going to complain about Guilliman trying to shore up the Imperium by founding Secundus, well, you should really be complaining about Russ going to face Horus. You should be complaining about Corax fighting his guerrilla war behind enemy lines. Each Primarch was governed by their nature. Yet despite Russ leaving the throne world, despite the Raven Lord leaving the throne world, neither of them gets anywhere near the same amount of criticism as Guilliman. So, with the more emotional arguments leaning us to Guilliman's cause out the way, let's now address the simple practicality of the matter. Why forming Imperium Secundus was the right decision. As we've already said, as far as Guilliman was aware, the throne world could very likely already have fallen. The ruin storm was completely blocking out the rest of the Imperium. The Emperor's light was completely gone. No matter what war you was in, no matter what tragedy you befell, the Astronomicon was always sign of the Emperor. No matter what, it was always there. And now, it was gone. When Guilliman activated the Pharos beacon and focused it upon Macragge, an entire galaxy's worth of refugees came seeking salvation, with nothing but stories of death and destruction, of darkness. Not a single one of them could say the throne world still lived. Guilliman made the only practical decision he could make. If the throne world was gone, if his father was gone, he had to keep the Imperium alive. For me, Guilliman really sums it up the best himself. He had no choice but to deal with the facts. As long as his legion and Macragge still stood, then the Imperium still stood. And all of that is not even including the realities of the ruin storm, the no pun intended chaos of the entire Imperium. Even had Guilliman attempted to reach Terra, without the Astronomicon he couldn't even be sure he was headed in the right direction. All those refugees were arriving for a reason. Because any form of travel was an absolute nightmare. Guilliman made not only the right choice, he made the only choice. Let's look at it this way. If Guilliman was indeed in the wrong and making the wrong decision, then why did Lion L. Johnson and Sanguinius agree with him? We've got a Primarch who would famously declare loyalty is its own reward, who's famed for his steadfast loyalty, and yet he agreed to found Imperium Secundus. We've got the angel, the paragon of virtue, the very symbol of devotion and loyalty. And yet he too agreed to found Guilliman's Imperium. Guilliman had a logic to his decision, a logic two of his most loyal brothers agreed with. At the end of the day, that could very well be why many people don't have an issue with his decision. But now on to the reasons against, and a little devil's advocate, why Guilliman's Imperium Secundus was the wrong decision. Well, a big part of Guilliman's decision making was in dealing with facts according to him. He knew for a fact that Macragge and the Ultramarines still stood, and so in them the Imperium still stood. Well, yes, very true, but he also didn't know for a fact that the throne world had fallen. In fact, he pretty much abandoned any attempt at even trying to get there. In Guilliman remaining focused within Ultramar, he gave up any attempt at trying to help the throne world. He simply left them to the hands of Horus. Guilliman essentially wrote off the Horus heresy as a loss, and he began to focus on the war after. When his brother arrived with virtually the entire Dark Angel's Legion, did he then decide to make a push for the throne world with a force of 2 legions? No. He talked him into why they should stay within Ultramar. When Sanguinius arrived, did he decide to make a push for the throne world with 3 full legions? No. He talked him into why they should stay within Ultramar. The fact is, when they finally came to the conclusion that the Emperor may still live, which they did because of something Conrad said, not because they had any real proof, they managed to clear the Ruinstorm and get Sanguinius and the Blood Angels Legion through. All Guilliman did by founding the Imperium Secundus was waste time. And considering the Siege of Terra was entirely a race against time, an argument could very well be said that the Imperium Secundus cost the Imperium its Emperor. We see it play out in every page and chapter of the Siege of Terra. Rogel is doing everything he can to buy time for Guilliman's arrival. The entire success of the heresy depended on Guilliman arriving to Terra. And for the most part, it does have to be said, he wasn't even trying. I cannot wait to see Rogel's face if he ever finds out about that. Let's look at it in another way. If the Imperium Secundus was the right decision, then why does Sanguinius keep it secret when he returns to Terra? In his reunion meeting with Malcador, Russ, Jagatai and Rogel, why does he intentionally keep it hidden? Why, when he feels Malcador probing his mind, does he use his own power to keep him out? The simple fact is because he knows it's a sin. He knows they should never have founded the Imperium Secundus. Yes, he wishes to confess his sins to his father, to face his judgment, but he's not willing to face the judgment of his brothers. That's definitely a good arrow in the quiver of those who argue against it. Now for me personally, like I said when I first read it, I didn't really see the big deal in Guilliman's idea. I, like most of you, saw it as him doing what he thought was best, that he was simply trying to save the Imperium. However, in seeing how it reflected after, in not only his and his brother's guilt, but also 10,000 years later, I do accept that Guilliman made some real missteps. Firstly, by naming it Imperium Secundus, he is undoubtedly giving off the impression that it's a new Imperium, that either the original one is dead or he's forsaking it anyway. And so you can completely understand why that would go down like a lead balloon with, say, Roboute Guilliman, who was always fighting valiantly by the Emperor's side. You can also understand why history looks back on it with such disdain. And we know that thanks to Custodian Colquhoun's jibe at Guilliman within the Dawn of Fire series, where he tells him he can't just make another empire beyond the rift, which visibly hurts Guilliman. For me, I understand the premise in trying to refire the dream of the Imperium, to reignite the light amid the darkness, but it certainly would have gone down better had he just declared the Imperium still lives, that it still lives within Ultramar, rather than christening it an Imperium Secundus. Yes, it's a simple turn of phrase, but it's one that matters. And on that note, I really don't think appointing an emperor should have been done until the fate of the throne world was known. Did the Imperium Secundus' morale really depend on having an emperor? It had 3 primarchs and legions. Not only that, it was Guilliman's own 500 world empire, so they saw him as its lord anyway. They had always looked to him as its inspiration. And you've also got Sanguinius, a visible representation and symbol of light. The guy's a literal flying angel. I really don't think Secundus needed to name an emperor, and if he really wanted to go down that route, that he needed a title to give Sanguinius to show that he wasn't christening himself as Lord, then why not just name it something else until the fate of their father was made certain? For example, the Steward of Secundus, or simply give Sanguinius the Lord of Ultramar title. Something else other than the Emperor. The hindsight look of founding a second Imperium is bad enough, but when you've named an Emperor too, all the while the throne world is still fighting for survival, it really doesn't age well. In a way, it's only Sanguinius making it to Terra that's Guilliman's saving grace. Can you imagine how bad it would have looked if none of them had have made it to the throne world? And this is exactly why it's so frowned upon within the lore. The history books won't say Guilliman's emotions, they will simply state the facts. When the record of Imperium Secundus comes to light, when the Custodes look back on Guilliman's actions within the heresy, while the Emperor was fighting against the traitor Horus, Roboute Guilliman was on the other side of the galaxy, not desperately fighting his way to get to the throne world, instead declaring a new, second Imperium, and appointing a new Emperor. When you look at it simply that way, you can absolutely understand why this is probably coming around again within the current storyline, and why it's going to be pretty controversial for Guilliman. We've got the dynamic of knowing Guilliman's honourable intentions, contrasted against the simple record of fact. It's going to be real interesting to see how it all develops. And for me, even more so now with the reflection that the voting has given, knowing that maybe most of the fanbase feel that Guilliman was indeed in the right. But as always guys, what do you think? Why did you vote in favour of Guilliman making the right decision? Or why did you vote against him? Have I managed to sum up your reasoning? Or was there something else that factored into your decision? Are you surprised that over 80% of the voting went in favour of Guilliman? Do you think this comes down to the fact we know his intentions were honourable? Or do you think the voting was simply down to a matter of fact? As always guys, leave your thoughts in the comments below, I love to read them. Huge thank you to all my subscribers, your support truly means a lot to me, it really does. And if you're new, please consider subscribing to help the channel grow. If you enjoyed this particular vid, then why not drop a like on it too? But with that said, I am off, and I'll see you all again real soon.